Okay, once again, good morning, everybody. I think we might make a start. Thanks for joining us this morning. I guess we'll open by saying it's great to be back. It's great to be back playing again as we work our way through resumption from lockdown. To kick off from the start, though, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present, future and emerging. Today we'll hear from a number of the BV managers. We'll update you. There's the agenda there. We'll hear from Dean around the COVID updates. There's been restricted activity documents released again with some updates. We're going to hear from Anita Ledger, who's the General Manager at McKinnon Basketball. She has kindly agreed to present a particular personal case study of how McKinnon has dealt with a COVID case. We'll hear from Justine Salida, BV's People and Culture Manager, with an HR update. Dean will talk about leads again. Grant Wallace is going to present a proposal around size 5 basketballs and how we should roll them out and adopt them in Victoria and where they're appropriate. David Huxtable will talk to us about a facilities update, and then to conclude we'll have Mark Walters from Cocoon Cool Roofs, who's a new partner of BV's, and he's going to present what offerings they have for the basketball community. Hopefully we'll get that done in a reasonable time and everyone can get on with their days and prepare for, I think it's 2:15, to watch the Boomers take on the USA at the Olympics. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Dean for a COVID update. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Morning, everybody. Interesting day we're in at the moment with the 6 cases announced today, 3 of which are potentially in the community, definitely 1 in the community. So we'll just have to see what rolls out and happens today. I've spent a fair bit of time this morning working with Tassie and South Australia, trying to figure out what's happening with those borders for NBL1 games. So JP, if you can just flick forward. Tuesday night, there was a restricted activities direction update issued, and it had in it 2 things. One, that the limit of 100 people per indoor space would continue for recreational facilities, so that's no change. But the part that they did have in there was the removal of the no spectator rule. Subsequently being told this morning at about 7:30 this morning that was actually an error by the Department of Health, and that no spectator rule will be reinstated effective immediately. So whilst we thought there was a little bit of an opportunity, and the biggest challenge, I guess, around this no spectator part really revolves around the single parent with siblings scenario. We thought that this no spectator rule being removed would probably give us the room to be able to say that under 18 siblings could enter stadiums, but at this stage the advice from Sport and Rec Victoria this morning is that still can't happen. So we just need to maintain that situation, or that line that we're on right now. JP, if you can keep going. Wanted to give you an update, I guess, on the New South Wales border bubble as well. It got adjusted again on Tuesday night. And one of the big things, I guess, that we've managed to do within the restricted activity directions is get sport included into the reasons that New South Wales residents can come into Victoria. I can confirm that the sport part extends outside of the border bubble for the New South Wales residents, so that they can come into Victoria to play sport, to play organised sport, competition, community sport. They can play that within the border bubble, no problem at all, and then go home. If their games are scheduled outside of the border bubble, then they are allowed to travel reasonable distance to be able to complete the game. So if their game is scheduled in Melbourne, then they're allowed to travel to Melbourne, and then they can go back and cross the border and go back home to New South Wales, most likely Albury or somewhere around there. The real key to that, and what we've been talking to those clubs that are affected by those border community areas, is that it just doesn't allow for them to go to the pub when they come to Melbourne. They can't go out and do things that are outside of the reasons that they're allowed to enter Victoria. So fairly restrictive on their movement of what they're allowed to do, but they are allowed to come in and they are allowed to come to Melbourne to play. The other change that was made on Tuesday night was the removal of the cap of 10 people per vehicle when you're traveling as a group or a tour group. So clubs that we had some situations last weekend where we had to cancel some games because we just literally couldn't get teams to travel to where they needed to get to in any sort of reasonable transport without any extraordinary costs. So that's been removed. But the one thing that still remains, if you are having to book accommodation, is that right now you can only book accommodation for people from your immediate family or your intimate partner. So therefore, if teams are traveling, we know we've got Mildura coming to Melbourne this weekend. They've had to book an individual room for each individual athlete this weekend just to be able to get down here and play. So just be mindful of those things. We'll keep you up to date as up to date as we possibly can as things evolve. Today's situation is probably going to make it a little bit more challenging for the next week or so, but we'll just see how that plays out. And then as we hear or see more, we'll just keep releasing updates. But we didn't release one after Tuesday night's update. There wasn't anything overly significant in it. And now that spectator rule has been reinstated, there's definitely nothing overly exciting in there to release a public announcement. So we'll just keep dealing with individual clubs on things that we need to at the moment, and make broader statements when the time comes. Other than that, from a COVID update, Nick, that's about it.
Good idea. Thanks, Dean. And that was quite detailed around interstate travel and movement around the state, not relevant to a lot of the associations, we understand, but that's the changing facts around restricted activity that relate to basketball at the moment. With that, we'll move on to our case study now, and I'd like to introduce Anita Ledger. So Anita, welcome. And thanks so much for your time today. I think this will be more relevant to all of us because you were presented with a COVID case at domestic junior basketball, and we really appreciate your time today in taking us through what you knew, what you learned, and how you handled it. So I'll leave it with you, Anita.
Thanks, Nick. And I'd much rather be talking about something else, but I guess this is what it is, and I think it's really interesting, you know, how it was handled and what the results and the outcomes have been. So really positive for basketball and community sport. So sorry, Jared, if you can just flick the slide. So I'll just take you through just an overview on how we came to the positive case, and then take you through the actions and the steps that we followed during the process. So on the 15th of July, we were notified by two club presidents in the afternoon that a student from St Patrick's Primary School in Murrumbina, which is in our area, had tested positive to COVID. Both of the club presidents advised the student was not a member of their club, but was a member of another McKinnon club. And the identity of the student wasn't revealed at the time. Interesting, the information I received from these two presidents was they sort of contradicted each other, which was a challenge in itself. One of the club presidents I was able to use as a reliable source because he did have a connection with his son at the school. So I sort of took his advice a little further. But just from that, McKinnon had every intention of going ahead with our VJBL training, our Aussie Hoops programs, and our Big V training on that Thursday afternoon. We hadn't gone into lockdown at this stage, but we knew that something was probably going to happen. But we did have intentions of going through with that training. As soon as we found out that there was a positive case, we did cancel everything effective immediately. So that was sort of around about 4 o'clock that afternoon, while we were still trying to get information as to the case. And then obviously we went into lockdown at 11:59 that night. I'll just go through some of the actions that we took from this initial information. So when I found out, no one was able to give me the identity of the student just due to privacy. So I was able to find out the club that the student did play with, and that was Bentley Lakers. I gave their club secretary a call. He was unaware of the positive case. And at that point, he immediately pulled data from Play HQ, identifying that 16 Lakers players attended St Patrick's Primary School, and 7 of those players were students in grade 4. And that was sort of the information that I was able to give him, that it was a grade 4 student. And as you can see from, I've just pasted the data below from Play HQ where he was able to identify those people. Obviously, I've taken out the parents and the players' names. So what he did immediately was contacted all of the families that we identified from this list, and not just the grade 4 students' families, every family that's listed there, just emailed as a welfare check and advised them that all related basketball activities had been cancelled immediately and that we have identified a positive case. I then emailed all of our club presidents, and we sent out an email to every single member in our database advising them that all basketball activity was cancelled effective immediately. Thanks, Jared. So I'll just talk through how the positive case was identified, and that was through St Patrick's Primary School. This student was linked to the MCG outbreak on the evening of Saturday, the 10th of July. Now, the positive case had played domestic basketball on the Saturday morning, but he had not attended any basketball activity that week because he was feeling unwell. The identified case, his team trained at Volkston Primary School, which is a local primary school, but he didn't attend that training that week. So just when we thought that we were sort of in the clear, because he didn't go to the training session, on Friday, the next day, we were advised that a second student at St Patrick's Primary School tested positive, and this student was in the same class as the first positive case, and unfortunately in the same basketball team, and he had attended the training session on the Wednesday. So from there, and how we found out that information about the second case was that the Bentley Lakers coach was contacted by Monash Health on Friday, as she was being given as a primary close contact to the positive case. So the positive case was contacted by phone, and the family had to say where they'd been, and that's how the coach was identified. So as soon as the coach was spoken to, she called the Lakers secretary, and we were able to identify that the positive case had been at the school between 5 and 6 p.m. training, and immediately that school was put into a T1 exposure site, and that was declared from 4:45 until 6:30 on the Wednesday afternoon. Now, Bentley Lakers were then able to supply the Department of Health with the team list and the contact details from Play HQ for the 4 teams that were training during those exposure periods. And then all of the close contacts were contacted by Bentley Lakers and advised to test and isolate immediately. And then they were told that the Department of Health would also be following them up and talking to them about their quarantine for 14 days. And this applied to both the players, their parents, and their siblings. They all had to go and get tested and put themselves into 14 days quarantine. All of those close contacts were followed up, but unfortunately that sort of didn't happen for a few days after. So by the time the Department of Health had got in contact with them, they'd already tested and they were already in their own quarantine. And then from there, that afternoon, the NBA provided a written statement to all clubs that we did have a positive case. And we were pretty clear that there was no need for any panic. They hadn't played, games in the greater community, and the exposure site was one venue in between a certain period. And then I also sent an email off to Nick just to let him know. So just a little bit more information on identification. So the Department of Health made contact with the Lakers coach, as I said earlier. The club secretary was contacted by Monash South Health Public Unit, because they were responsible for the local school as a T1 site. And then the initial contact was to determine the primary close contacts were all reached out and told, to get tested. All of the information that was provided by Bentley Lakers to identify the primary close contact came from Lakers training schedules. So they keep a shared schedule of all their training sessions on a shared drive with the team age group, the team name, the coach's name, and the coach's contact details. So that was able to be provided really quickly. And then Lakers were then able to provide the Monash Health with a team list they could pull really quickly from Play HQ's participation report. And at this stage, an extra 2 teams were identified as primary close contacts because they extended the exposure period till the end of that training night's booking. Folkestone Primary School had, and this is some of the challenges we have with working with schools. So they have their own QR code, which is all throughout the school. And then when Bentley Lakers go in to do their trainings, they replace the school's QR code with their own. And the cleaners had removed the posters and they didn't have any other ones with them. So no posters went up that day, but they do, every member, which I'll talk about on the next slide, do have access to QR coding in through their phones. So the Lakers secretary sent the QR codes off to Monash Health and they were identified along with Folkestone's codes in their system. But at this case, that information wasn't really useful. It was more the data that we were able to pull from the other systems in place. So Lakers were able to identify that 44 primary close contacts, so 40 players and 4 coaches. And this estimated that 200 to 300 people were now at home in quarantine just from this event. And then the Department of Health began sending text messages to all of these primary close contacts on Sunday, which was 3 days after Lakers had provided the list. Thanks, Jared. So this is just the information that sort of provides NBA's COVID safe protocols and what Bentley Lakers do. So we, and the NBA and all of our clubs have a pretty comprehensive COVID check-in process with, mask wearing, check-ins, all of those rules. The Bentley Lakers require parents to check into training sessions using the QR codes, and they have them for each school, as you can see on the slide. And the coaches are responsible for ensuring that this happens, but due to them having such a large number of teams and training venues, different training venues, it can be pretty difficult for them to keep track of that. So you can go to the next slide, Jared. So I guess just in summary from that, the Bentley Lakers secretary was able to identify all the primary close contacts, and he was actually identified himself as one. And so he's been able to provide me with a pretty detailed summary of his experience. He's sort of said that the Department of Health, when he spoke with them over that weekend, were pretty overwhelmed and struggling to contact people in that time, in an appropriate time frame. And Lakers were able to identify and contact primary close contacts 48 to 72 hours before the Department of Health could. The Department of Health's text messaging was pretty generic and didn't really identify locations or dates, just sort of said that these people had been exposed to a COVID positive case. And the Department of Health's phone interviews were quite generic, and they just read off a script and didn't really offer any support or advice to individual circumstances. Bentley Lakers did have one primary close contact that didn't speak English. They were Chinese, so they've been able to step in and try and provide them with support so that they knew what was going on. So just in summary, I guess the processes that are in place and the systems that we as community sport and basketball use to identify and manage contacts, we've been able to do that pretty quickly and pretty professionally, I think, with our own data that we keep as associations and clubs, as well as Basketball Victoria's Play HQ system. And, I think that proves that we were able to provide and get in contact and keep in contact with our own member base, a lot sooner than what the Department of Health were able to manage it. And then I'd just like to acknowledge the Bentley Lakers secretary and club for the amazing work that they did. These guys are volunteers. They were able to pull data really, really quickly. The communication that they had with their own members throughout this period of the 14 days quarantine, they kept in touch with them. They reminded them of their day 13 test. And then when they were able to, and then they'd be contacted by the Department of Health when they were able to come out of their 14-day quarantine. No further cases, positive cases came out of this, which was really great. And everyone's now, back into sport. So thank you.
Thanks, Anita. That's a wonderful presentation. I might ask you a few questions just to get your reaction to a few things. It appears that we were very lucky in as much as the infected case was only exposed for an hour or so and hadn't participated in trainings during the week. That's fair to say?
Yeah, so they did participate in that 1 hour training, but they didn't play games. We were lucky that, they weren't a VJBL player, so they hadn't attended any additional training sessions that week. So yeah, definitely in that case, there was certainly a lot of luck around that.
Yes, and so the point you're really driving home here is, to have your systems in place and to make sure that you're pedantic about them and strict about them. Hopefully we'll never have to use them, but when and if that time does come, as we've seen, it was really important, especially at a club level, that the clubs were across what they needed to do.
Yeah.
And had been, I guess, studiously, getting people to QR code in and check in and record that data, which, as we know, can be laborious and painful, and we can get a bit slack. But you would suggest that that was one of the reasons that we could contact people so quickly as a sport, as opposed to the Department of Health.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if we hadn't reached out and contacted everyone directly through the data that we had, knowing who was where and when, we were able to identify the primary close contacts, immediately, and were able to get in touch with them immediately. And if we had relied on, Department of Health to do that, 72 hours later would have been way too long. So we were able to get those people into isolation and get tested, straight away. And, I think, nothing against the Department of Health, but the 72 hours is a long time. And, the point is that we have systems in place that are quite superior and really helped us, not spread this any further within that time period.
So look, we don't really know how much they take into account when we lobby through Sport and Record to the Department of Health, and we do it regularly and constantly. We like to think we had some influence in the recent restrictions being eased earlier than had previously been in allowing indoor sport to start straight away after a lockdown. But what we constantly push to the department is that basketball is very good at knowing who is in their buildings, and we are controlling that information. So the message I would advise everyone to take to their clubs is to maintain the standards, keep everything alive in terms of the protocols that have been put in place. Hopefully they'll never be needed, but what we're putting out there to government is that as a sport, we know who is participating in our buildings and when, and hopefully that's resonated to a degree where they've started to understand that basketball can be a controlled and safe environment in this COVID world. Thanks, Anita. Really appreciate your time, and well done on a well managed process through that infectious case.
Oh, good. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to be contacted if after this session.
And just to remind everyone, we will be posting out the link to this recording, so Anita's presentation will be used part of that link, but I'm sure we'll be able to provide that if anyone wants that as a separate document. We'll keep moving. With that, I'll hand over to the Basketball Victoria People and Culture Manager, Justine Salida, to give us a human resources update. So over to you, Justine.
Thanks, Nick. Morning, everyone. Just wanted to take just a couple of minutes to talk about some things coming up in the HR space at the moment. There have been some changes to legislation that are worth looking at, particularly if you employ casuals. I have just put a screen grab on here about a casual employment information statement, which is a fairly new document that's come out of Fair Work. It's similar to the Fair Work information statement that we need to give to all employees either before or just as we employ them. So basically, it just includes information for casual employees about what is a casual employee and some of their entitlements and rights. So that is important to have a look at and just be across that. So included in there is also a pathway for casual employees to become full-time or part-time. And in terms of your requirements, if you're a small business employer, and that's with 15 or less employees, then you would need to give that to your existing casual employees as soon as possible after March this year. So basically as soon as you can. Other employers have to give the statement to their existing casual employees as soon as possible after the 27th of September this year. So obviously just make sure you've read it through yourself carefully before you give that out and make sure that what you're doing is compliant. And then going forward, if you hire more casual staff in future, you would then give it to them either before or as they start work. In terms of the legislation coming through Fair Work at the moment, they have included a definition of what is a casual employee. So just to go over that briefly, under the Fair Work Act, a person is a casual employee if they're offered a job and the offer does not include a firm advance commitment that the work will continue indefinitely with an agreed pattern of work, and that they accept the offer knowing there's no firm advance commitment and become an employee. So, for example, if you have someone that's casual, their roster can change week to week to suit the employer's needs. They can also refuse shifts or swap shifts. And those are just a couple of the examples of how you can determine if they're a casual employee. There's also been some going backwards and forth with Fair Work about how to demonstrate they're a casual employee on pay slips. And the latest information has been adjusted to include that if you're wanting to show an hourly rate includes casual loading, that you can include a note on their pay slip that the hourly rate incorporates the relevant casual loading rather than having the requirement to split that out. Now, I understand that information won't apply to everyone, but it is worth noting because it is quite important legislation coming out at the moment. Also, if we can just move to the next slide, Jared, that would be great. In terms of, I've covered sort of most of those points. In terms of casuals versus volunteers, I know that we have a lot of volunteers in our associations and in basketball. It is important to ensure from the start that you're making it clear whether they're an employee or a volunteer. And you may wish to do that through in writing with a volunteer agreement. Also, other changes that have come up recently are superannuation and wage increases for awards. So with superannuation, that's gone from 9.5% to 10%. And it's also important just to keep an eye on award rates as they were adjusted in July, and just make sure that you go through to do a review and ensure that your payments include the minimum entitlements. So those are the points that I just wanted to cover today briefly. Otherwise, I hope everyone's well and enjoying being back on the court.
Good on you. Thanks, Justine. Appreciate that. Moving along back to Dean, and we'll do a BV Leagues update.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to stay as cautiously optimistic as I can while I talk about this, as I watch things unfold on Twitter at the moment with this morning's announcements. So none of this information should be new, but it may have gone to delegates, so it may not have made it through to CEOs and GMs. So I just wanted to sort of touch on the final structures of each of the leagues. So essentially all of our VJBL leagues have been reduced to a top four, with the exception of the top six you can see there in VJL. So we've reduced everything down to shorten the number of games or number of weeks that it takes to complete the final series, to allow for more teams to stay on court for more games in the regular season, essentially. At the start of the year, I'm sure everyone knows at the start of the year we were tight in terms of the schedule. We were even playing in the last weekend of the school holidays, which is unusual for VJBL. We used up the one week we had in reserve and then went into lockdown again. So we've had to cancel some games throughout the course of it. but that triggered us to move from the standard final series to the structure that is that's on your screen right now. JP, we can go to the next one. From a Big V point of view, the most recent lockdown again caused the trigger of changes to the finals series. So champ men, women, Division 1 men, women, Division 2 men and women, Youth League 1 men and women, and Youth League 2 women all got reduced to a top 4. The VCs, VYC, sorry, and Youth League 2 stayed as unchanged over 3 weeks just because of their conference system. So it was a little bit more challenging to do that. Again, all of the finals and stuff have been pushed back a little bit to try and get the extra games in. Our whole primary focus has been about trying to get as many people to play as many games as they possibly can and try and keep the integrity around all of the leagues from teams playing the right number of games. So that's the primary focus of what we're doing and adjusting finals accordingly. And then the last one is NBL 1. So while we've sorry, JP, if you can go to the next one for me. Whilst we've managed to keep the top 8 structure in NBL 1, we've adjusted the finals down to 2 weeks. So it's a pretty tight window. The quarterfinals will be played on the Friday and Saturday. So instead of a qualifying elimination final into a semi-final, into a prelim, or prelim into semis and then into grand, we've changed that to a quarterfinal structure. So 1v8, 2v7, etc. That includes some interstate games potentially. So if the Tasmanian teams or Mount Gambier, for instance, end up in the top 4, they will host their final on the Friday night. We will then fly the teams to wherever they've got to be for the Sunday to play a semi-final, which are all going to be played in Melbourne. That was our one caveat to be able to get this to happen, was that we needed to know the location of the Sunday games. So we've locked them in. They'll all be played in Melbourne. And then the championship game is played at SBC on the 11th of September. Whilst this is amazingly optimistic, the national finals remains in play and remains on the table at the moment. But I mean, ultimately, border restrictions are going to determine its fate. We have set a date of the 3rd of September as the last date that we will make a decision on whether or not that event is likely to proceed or not. But we'll just sort of see how that plays out in the next couple of weeks. So. And then if we can go to the next one, please. Thank you. Just want to give you an update, I guess, on CBL. So it's on the horizon, which is great. Entries closed for CBL this Sunday. Currently, there's 24 men's teams entered, 22 women's teams entered, which is up on the season that we've just gone through, which was the COVID-affected season at the 8-week season that happened. Slightly down on the previous year. Matt expects we're going to get over the number that we had in the previous year, which is great. And with the addition of Wonthaggi, Mansfield and Macedon coming in, apologies for missing the R on the end of Rangers. I typed that very quickly, clearly. It's great to see those teams coming in to CBL, and we've obviously got a new focus and a little bit of a different thought process around it with Sammy moving to Bendigo and Matt Royal and Melissa coming in to run the CBL. So, and then the last one, just the rollout of ref book for the TOD. So we anticipate that there's somewhere between 4,500 and 6,000 referees in Victoria. Obviously, there's never been a centralised registration process or system to know the exact number. Currently, since we released or opened registrations in RefBook for referees, there's been 550 registrations completed by individuals. We expect another 1,500 or so to be completed next week when there is a software update that goes out allowing associations to complete the registration and pay on behalf of referees if you've been collecting their referee registration fees yourself. But it does mean that there's about 2,000 to 3,000 missing from the system, which obviously our focus is going to be to get those people into the system so that we can then continue to track and monitor their progress as referees, make sure that they are completely connected to the system, and that Jo and her team can then service them as needed to ensure the development referees. So lots of things going on, you know, in a really, really busy time, trying to keep fixtures online and leagues online, and obviously with an eye on the future of what does 2022 look like, and what have we got coming up over that summer period. So watch this space. I'm sure these meetings are, I mean, for me, they're hugely beneficial to be able to share information with everybody about what we're planning and what we're doing. Hopefully you get enough out of them for us to continue doing these moving forward as well. Thanks, Nick.
Morning, Dean. Thank you. Moving right along, we'll hand over to Grant Wallace, the General Manager of High Performance and Pathways. He's been in charge of undertaking a project that's gone through a number of phases so far. I'll get him to present this. It's really exciting from my point of view. There are a lot of words on the slides coming up, so you don't have to read them all. Grant will summarise them as he moves through them. But I'll remind everyone once again that these presentations will be sent out later on today or tomorrow once this meeting is concluded. So with that, we'll pass over to you, Grant, to present the Size 5 basketball project.
Thanks, Nick, and morning, everybody. If I can just, firstly, before I get into the presentation, just two quick updates I think is appropriate for this group. I, like Dean, remain cautiously optimistic about the Under-16 National Championships. Basketball Australia have rescheduled those for the 26th of September to October 3 in Darwin. So we're trying to plan for that right now. That was scheduled in Perth in July. And in 2022, Basketball Australia is scheduling the Under-20 National Championships in Mackay the last weekend of March. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up on that with your planning, because it does affect a number of your coaches and players. In relation to the proposal, thanks, Jared. Next slide. The paper we're putting forward is something that we've been speaking about in various levels for a number of years, about the implementation of a size 5 basketball for under-12 competition. Apologies for those BJBL delegates that may be in this forum that may have seen this presentation. Like Nick mentioned, there's plenty of information here. I'll try and zip through it as quickly as we can. But effectively in June, we tabled our recommendation paper from the High Performance Department to the BV Executive, was endorsed, and to the BV Board was also endorsed, and worked closely with the Junior Commission in relation to the policy. And we believe that it's for the benefit of our basketball in a number of areas, which I'll just try and highlight now. Thanks, Jared. So currently we have the under-12 basketball, under-12s around the state use the size 6 ball. They play on a regulation 3 metre high rim. And this is the same as we see right now with the Olympics for the women's competitions. So we believe it creates a lot of unnecessary, inappropriate skill acquisition, muscle memory in their formative years. If you think about that, it's the same as a 6-foot adult playing on a 14-foot rim. So with the size 7 basketball. So for myself, and I know there are a number of people as well that would like under 12 and below to be used to use a basketball that is a smaller basketball, have no 3-point lines, and have a smaller rim for enjoyment, for coaching purposes, for better skill acquisition, and also for retention is a big strategy with our thinking here. But we are unable to do that, and we believe that the implementation of a size 5 basketball is a quick fix and quick and easy approach. Thanks, Jared. So we know that basketball is, shooting is the master skill. We could get 5 coaches together in a room, and each would have different points of emphasis and coaching techniques that they would require. But we believe that the master skill is something that we need to promote. And Australia has been a leader in this space with Palabinskas, Davies, Andrew Gay, Shane Hill, etc., being world tournament leading scorers. So it's something that we take very, very seriously, and to become exceptional shooters. But we're all finding, I'm sure that a number of the coaches in the room would acknowledge that, you know, when we get to under 13, 14, 15-year-olds, trying to correct shooting techniques from developed habits and skills that have been acquired in early age, it's almost impossible to correct and create a better shooter. So we believe, again, that this is the best way to go about this. Next slide, thanks, Jared. So recommendation from Breakthrough Basketball, which is a group that we saw in our research from America, is that the size 7 ball is perfect for men 15 and above, size 6 basketball for the boys between 12 to 14 and girls 12 and above, and the size 5 basketball being perfect for under 12s, 9 and 10 and 11s. So it's not just about the shooting that we're worried about or concerned about or wanting to impact. It's also about the creativity, the dribbling and passing skills for players. We actually implemented the size 5 ball into our under 12 Metro Jamboree over the last school holidays. And it was amazing to see the style and system of play that the players were undertaking, the creativity with a smaller ball and sort of replicating more of what they were seeing on their television screens. Thanks, Jared. So the proposal is to implement size 5 basketball into 12 and under competitions from September, and that'll be obviously in the VJBL competition from October. We already implemented that in jamborees for the Metro. We're pretty much unsure that the under 12 jamborees for country will actually occur given the current situation, but we'll be doing that in the skills days and collecting a whole lot of data to make sure that we've actually got first-hand information and watching the progression. So shot attempts in games, number of points. We've got about 10 or 15 different parameters that we're actually going to monitor and get data on from the last number of years and monitor that over the period of time and do that in all the age groups as well. And a number of associations are already doing this, which is fantastic. Thanks, Jared. So benefits, skill acquisition is obviously the main one. And the one paper that was actually identified was Adam Gorman, who was at the Centre of Excellence in basketball area, did a number of studies up there, but under the guise of Queensland Uni of Technology. There was a paper developed that was based on the anthros of an under 12 player. And it basically came down to the hand size and the size of the basketball and the hand span. So using that research, using that data, using the science, if you like, they were able to determine that the size 5 ball was the best and appropriate way to go. We've got a copy of that paper, so if anybody's interested, please make contact with me. We can forward that through to you. It's an interesting read on where we go to from here. We know that South Australian have been using under 12 competitions, have been playing on a 8-foot rim for many, many years, even when I was a junior player. It was always quite annoying when you get to the under 20s national championships and their form and style, and they were amazing shooters and developed some amazing shooters because of this policy that they had implemented. Thanks, Jared. Then second benefit is obviously the experience, particularly at the junior levels, where point scoring is such a great thing, and the joy you see on the faces of the players, and obviously retention rates, enjoyment of the opportunity is exactly what we're after. And also appropriate that right now we're seeing athletes in our sport with greater size, length, athletic abilities, and we need to make sure that we're moving along with the times. Again, back to my day, the two-handed chest pass was promoted as the way to pass. That's sort of gone now, with the one-handed push pass being prevalent in the way and for players to be successful. Thanks, Jared. And improved creativity, as we've mentioned before. The size 5 basketball, we think, better replicates for those athletes, that age group, to replicate what they see on the television screen. Thank you, Jared. So roadblocks, we know that with change, there's always impediments generally, but we've found that by us presenting this paper, talking with coaches, there's been resounding support for the policy. By ourselves, Victoria, doing this, we've seen that already New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, and pretty much all the other states are going to be doing the same. So it's going to be across the board, which is outstanding. We're just waiting for Victoria to get into action. Thanks, mate. Sorry, one other mention just on that last slide, that we've already spoken with Spalding. There is enough basketballs in play at the moment through their Aussie Hoops numbers of the size 5 ball to get to Christmas, and they'll have a restock of new basketballs with VJBL branding by January for the implementation of the balls there. We know also just some data in other sports, just some research that was undertaken. Ice hockey, we're having trouble with participation and retention rates. They went through it and increased the size of their goals, decreased the size of their rink, found that participation rates increased. Spanish basketball have been using a size 5 basketball for their under 12 competitions for many, many years. And we see that how good the Spanish are with their shooting technique. AFL play on smaller grounds, smaller footballs, soccer do the same, cricket. So we found that basketball have already done this by implementing a size 6 ball for the 14 to 15-year-old boys and below. So we just think it's an appropriate policy to put forward. Thanks, Jared. So implementation, I mentioned we've already done this in the skills days for Metro and the Jamboree with great success. And the Jamboree, we were hopeful that we would do it in the country Jamboree later next month, but that looked like that event won't actually occur. We've done a number of presentations on the paper and getting the information out, and again with resounding support. So for the following VJBL season, having this implemented is a great thing, and we'll monitor over the next 10 years and hopefully get to see 10 Victorians on every national team herein as quality shooters. That's it.
Great, thanks, Grant. Really positive proposal and good progress rolling that out. So well done. And as Grant said, happy to pass on the paper that backs up the proposal with the science and answer any questions if anyone has them. We'll move to a facilities update. Normally this will be presented by Steve Walter, our Manager of Government Relations and Facilities. He's been crook for a number of weeks and has been unavailable. So thanks, Dave Huxtable, our GM of Community Member Services, for stepping in and presenting this. So I'll throw to you, Dave.
No worries. And yeah, just a shout out to Stephen as he hopefully makes a speedy recovery. So passing on our best wishes to you, Stephen. On the screen at the moment, there's 3 examples of stadiums that are under construction, and you can follow the movements in this development through social media, which I'm enjoying all the posts that are put out across these 3 and others that are happening at the moment. Just to consider that over the next 18 months, we will definitely have a state and a federal election. State election will be later next year. The federal election will be up to when the government calls it. So just as these constructions are on, or developments are on the screen now, we need to be ready to be planning the next slide. And at the moment on our facilities spreadsheet, we have about 65 projects in various stages from feasibility planning to concept design. So it's a very exciting time in basketball as we have further developments. Whilst LGAs have just started as well in their, what are they, in their 2nd month of this financial year, they're also currently planning their 2022-2023 budget. So if you have any projects that require LGA funding, I would be looking at planning those out in the next 6 months, being in a really good position to lobby your local council in whether that's a change room reconfiguration or a complete new stadium. It's important that the evidence is to be shovel ready, as we say, and it's important that over the next 6 months we're planning to put them towards LGAs. Just the next slide, if I could please, Jared. These again are only examples of facilities that are under construction at the moment. The new Narrandjeri Stadium in the Darwin LGA, which is in Thornbury, that's expected to be completed by January 22. Mansfield's shortly to be completed. Mildura's very much underway, and so is Ballarat. Wangaratta and Warragul, 2 exciting projects there that come out of being that shovel ready. They had plans ready to go, and then it's a matter of just getting lucky with regards to funding, and they were both ready to go at their time. Yarrawonga had also done a power of work, and it's all in that planning to get to the point where you can actually be funded. So they're great examples of facilities. Masson Ranges, well, we've got 24 million in the bank there. We're looking at a project there of 34 million, so that will start, and further funds are required. As I said, there's 65 projects that are on Steve's spreadsheet, and we're working closely with all our funding partners to push those forward, and as we move through the next 18 months. I'll leave it at that at the moment, if I could, Nick.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, the message there is we need to be ready to seize the opportunities, both politically from council level, but also state and federal. So yeah, if you need any assistance, please get in touch, and we're happy to help you formulate some of the ongoing plans for more stadiums and more courts. I'd like to introduce Mark Walters, who is from Cocoon Cool Roofs. He's going to take us through their products and services and introduce himself. So Mark, if you're on the line, welcome, and I'll throw it to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me along. It's great to be a part of Basketball Victoria and supporting all the efforts you bring to a whole range of benefits for people who participate in basketball. So we're a new partner and we're really excited to be a part of things. What we're about really is partnering with organisations to provide powerful and long-standing solutions to issues experienced on the exterior of buildings, so in particular stadiums. And we go about this by applying a special membrane, but particularly to roofs, that is highly waterproof, but also very heat reflective as well. So it's an option in lieu of outright roof replacement. It addresses any water ingress issues and heat abatement issues as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We've been around for about 20 years, and as you can see, we work across a range of industries, health, local government, education, and commercial organisations as well. If we go to the next slide, we'll get a bit of a look at before and after. So you can see this particular roof, which was a kindergarten in this case, quite rusty, had a lot of issues with penetrations around skylights and that sort of thing, and was relying quite a lot on air conditioning, you can see there as well. If we go to the next slide, that's our aftershot. So yeah, in this case, we addressed those water ingress issues and cooled the building internally as well. So a good result. In terms of basketball world, if we go to the next slide, please. You probably all know this building, but perhaps not from this angle. And this is actually the Dandenong Basketball Stadium on Stud Road, and in particular, this is the show court area, which is used by the pro players there for training and obviously games as well. At this address, the main issue was leaks, and quite a lot of leaks. It was quite significant, and over arguably one of the most important areas of the court as well. So obviously that poses a risk to players and spectators as well in terms of slips and trips. But it affects usability, it affects player morale and spectator morale as well, and can affect revenue on those wet days when you just can't use your court. So if we go to the next slide, and that's the after shot. You'll notice it's quite a stark white. We do any sort of colour, and we find white is the most heat reflective though. So that's what we recommend if it's not a sort of aesthetic issue. So this is the after shot. We managed to address all the leak issues that were on this particular roof, and in addition, we were able to internally cool the court, and we can do that by up to about 10 degrees. So not only is the water ingress issue taken care of, but also you've got a cooler, more comfortable playing space, and your air conditioning is not working as hard on those hot days that we have throughout Victoria. Lower your power bills, and in an air-conditioned area, we would say by up to 20% confidently, perhaps more, and obviously reducing emissions as well. So a good bit of sustainability as well. If we go to the next slide, please. Just a few of our other features and benefits of what we do. The membrane comes with a 10-year warranty, so if you put it on there and there's leaks 3 years, 5 years down the road, you don't need to pay a roof plumber to come out and sort those out. That's on us. It's part of our promise to you. It is GECA certified, which basically means that it's good for the environment. One of the really good things about the offering, I think, is that there's no disruption to your normal business operations. So players can still play, people can work in offices inside stadiums and that sort of thing while we're working on the roof. There's no disruption there, unlike a roof replacement or some other sort of major capital works. We have a very small operational footprint. I mentioned it's a great alternative to roof replacement. I've mentioned it reduces power costs and in air-conditioned areas and your carbon footprint. And in those sort of areas, you're looking at a return on investment in 3 to 5 years. Last slide there. Great. So there's my contact details and the contact details of a colleague of mine. If you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. And we understand that you often have to work through LGAs to get capital works done. So if you're in that boat, we'd still love to hear from you and perhaps work out how we can work together to bring any issues to council's attention and get some kind of result. I'll leave it there. Thanks again very much. for having me along, and great to be a part of Basketball Victoria.
Good on you, Mark. Thanks for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate your support of Victorian basketball. To reiterate Mark's comments, we look to really support people who support us. So yeah, if you've got any issues with your stadiums, whether you control them or not, certainly get in contact with Cocoon and introduce them to council or other landlords if appropriate. That brings us to a close today. So we really appreciate everyone's time. We've got in under an hour. As I've said a number of times, this recording will be emailed out to all our association members for viewing at a later time if they weren't able to make it today, or if any of you need to go to specific parts. Once again, feel free to email or call us at the BV offices if you require any further information or you have any questions or comments. Keep hanging in there, everyone. We're getting there. We're getting some rounds in. Dean, I see him monitoring the Twitter as we speak. Hopefully this is a minor blip, but we could stay open for and get some momentum going in the sport. Hope everyone has an opportunity to look at the telly at about 2:15 and cheer on the Boomers and see if we can get a historic result out of that game. Other than that, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks, everyone.